and welcome to Veterans of the Valley. I'm Tom Turbeville. Jules Jacquin of College Station is one of many proud Aggies whose education was interrupted by World War II. But there was plenty to learn in the Army as a member of Company K of the 102nd Infantry Division that swept through France and Belgium and Holland on its way to Germany near war's end. The war ended for Jules Jacquin in February of 1945 when the building he was in took a direct artillery hit. He was one of the few survivors who survived that attack. His is one of many stories of distinguished service, and we welcome Jules Jacquin to Veterans of the Valley. Jules, it is a pleasure to have you, and first off, thank you for your service. You were raised in El Paso and found your way all the way to College Station to Texas A&M, both you and your brother George. I want to talk about that trip first because that was a long, long train ride from El Paso to College Station. That was a little bit of a culture shock, too. You said they even spoke differently here than they did in El Paso, right?
Yes, they did.
Talk about the train trip and coming to College Station. You all wanted to be engineers, and that's why you came to A&M.
Well, that's right. We had it in the back of our minds that we'd like to be engineers, and so my brother and I got on the train, as you said, and from El Paso, and I guess it's about almost 800 miles, 750 miles from El Paso to College Station. We came through Houston, right, and then boarded the Daylight Express or Sunbeam Express. It was a very nice train, really, and debarked here at the railroad station that's not any longer here.
Right.
And then we just started to go to Texas A&M.
You told me that you all got off the train, you came over to the campus, and you asked somebody, well, where do we sleep? And they said, hey, just grab a bunk, find a dorm, and just sleep there, and everything will work its way out, right?
That's right, and I guess we ended up in Law Hall or Puryear Hall,
right,
which are not here anymore.
Exactly, yeah. Exactly. The war was on by this time. This was 1942, and the U.S. was involved in World War II, and you enrolled in the active reserve. Sort of talk about that, why you did that, because you could see the writing on the wall. You knew that you were going to be serving and that your education would be interrupted.
That's correct, and we wanted to have at least some kind of decision on our part where we would like to serve.
Right.
And the commandants here at Texas A&M, for us students that were not in the program to get commissioned because we were just freshmen, really, they recommended we enroll in the enlisted reserves, and so we did. And as we expected, the reserves were called up as a unit,
right,
and we liked that instead of being individuals picked here and there. So we were inducted.
That was May of 1943, and you just about finished your first full year, so they gave you credit for the whole school year.
They
so
did. I was very thankful for that.
I bet you were. You were through with your freshman year, and that's when you were inducted at Fort Sam Houston, immediately sent to Fort Maxey, which is near Paris, Texas. And then talk about, you had the choice to go receive education type training at different schools, and you chose Ohio State and another train ride up to Columbus, Ohio.
That's correct. Another long ride, and for the first time we were seeing different parts of the country, and that was interesting to us.
Right.
And our train took us to North Columbus and stopped at that big famous Ohio State University bowl. Football stadium.
Right.
And we stayed in that stadium our first night.
Yeah, you slept in the locker rooms.
Slept in the locker room, and that was great.
So I guess anytime you see a football game now at Ohio State, that means a little something special to you because that's the night that you spent the night when you got off the train. But eventually, you moved into some housing, some frat houses.
Frat
right?
houses. They didn't have any barracks there. It was not an army post, and so to quarter us, they took the student facilities that were there, the frat houses and sorority houses too.
Right, right. And Christmas Eve of 1943, you met a lady named Marie Tressimer, I believe is her name, and after your service in the war, you all were married, and you all are still married today, and about to celebrate, what, 60 years? Is
60
that right?
years coming September.
Is that
Yes,
right?
right.
That's fantastic. We'll talk a little bit more about Marie here in a little bit, but that program at Ohio State, it didn't last too very long. It was ended, and then in February of 1944, you were sent back to Texas near Elgin to Camp Swift, and that's where the 102nd was formed. Sort of talk about your time there.
Yeah, I guess myself with a cadre of what program was the ASTP program,
Right.
The Army Specialized Training Program. That's what the ASTP stands for. And apparently the Army was in great need of foot soldiers.
Right.
And so they took a bunch of us from all the schools and put them into operating units, mostly infantry divisions.
Right.
And so we filled part of the blanks in there.
Yeah, so it's pretty much like you described it. They were just a provider of manpower. Where they needed soldiers, they'd go to Camp Swift and find the soldiers out of this program.
Well, yes. The way they had been operating was that they had been using certain divisions, like the 102nd,
Right.
to pick recruits out of it. And so they would handpick folks out of it to fill in spots in overseas duty.
Right.
And so what they were doing at that time, what they did was to take all of us and staff the division completely, so it was 100%, train it up for a little while, and then send it overseas.
Right. You were headed to the European theater, but your next stop would be Fort Dix, New Jersey, and you went up there before going to Europe. But I want you to tell the story about when you were at Fort Dix and an operation that you were involved in Philadelphia. Talk about the Battle of Philadelphia.
The Battle of Philadelphia. Yeah, that was unexpected. Apparently they had a strike by the operators of the trams.
The streetcars.
Streetcars.
Right. Uh-huh.
And so the operators were afraid of doing their job.
Right.
So our division sent some of our people there so that we would ride in the streetcars and try to keep any of the Union people that were mad at the folks there calm down. And it worked very well because they weren't about to get involved against the U.S.Army. So,
Right. So
and they were friendly. They were really friendly.
So the relief people, I guess they were called scabs back then or something like that, who came in to run the streetcars, who were pretty much were stepping over the Union lines. They just didn't want any trouble between them and the Union people, so they brought you all up to keep the peace.
To keep the peace, and those guys, those people there in Philadelphia, all of them were so nice. They would feed us and bring us ice cream and whatever we wanted.
Not exactly great training for the Battle of the Bulge, but still, it was a
friendly USA.
It was a friendly duty. That's an interesting story. You went to England. Took about 12 days to get across because you all had to zigzag to avoid the enemy submarines, right?
Yes, that is correct. The zigzags would make up a zigzag path that the submarines couldn't wait at a particular place.
Right.
So we could try to fool them, I guess, and finally it got over. Like all our troops were ferried over there, and they all came through, and I don't believe there are any boats that were sunk by the submarines.
And going over.
Over.
Landed near Weymouth, England, I believe, and it was pretty much fast-tracked to Normandy, to the beach. Talk about your trip over the channel. I think you talked about describe the rafts that you were talking about, that you got on, that you went ashore in.
Yes, we stayed on the boat overnight there at Weymouth, England, and so we didn't debark there at all.
Right.
So the next morning, they shoved off and took us to the Cherbourg Peninsula.
Right.
Cherbourg, the harbor itself had been pretty well devastated and bombed out, so there were really no berthing facilities for the ships, and so we debarked on big rafts, and the strange thing about it, those rafts were being handled by the German prisoners. They enlisted, they got the German prisoners, and they took care of ferrying us on these rafts to land. Yeah.
I want to talk about, this was, by my guess, about 3 months after D-Day that you landed in Normandy, D-Day in the summer. This was September of 1944.
Yes.
Sort of describe, if you will, what Normandy Beach was like then. It was pretty much a supply dump there where they were held supplies to fight the war in Europe. Is that right?
That's correct. At that point in the situation, the U.S. did not have a fully operational port in Europe,
right?
And they unloaded stuff like they unloaded us, and shipped it on inland, and then from there had to move it across Europe to the front, who was they're approaching Germany pretty closely by that time.
Right, and this was done in trucks, and this was the operation that was known as the Red Ball Express.
You
were involved in that, right?
Our division was. They had folks driving trucks day and night, and the funny thing about it, interesting part about it was that the Army designated certain roads one way and other roads the other way, so that there were no stops. And it was complete travel one way and then return. So they were one-way highways, really.
Right, right. You said that your division was one of the last American divisions that was flanked by the British, and you got to work alongside British troops. And I believe in the newspaper article that was in, you talked about working with the Brits, and they were a different lot, but obviously a brave lot, just like the Americans.
And friendly.
Yes.
They call us the Yanks.
Right. And they were the Brits, right?
Yeah. And they liked their tea. And they would say, like, take a Jeep and open the radiator petcock,
right,
get some hot water,
right,
and make their tea.
I see. You talked quite glowingly, I believe, about when you were in Holland and you were moving through Holland, about the Dutch people and their plight, and talk a little bit about that, about the Dutch people and your relationship with them.
Yes, they were really friendly, easy to talk with. Most of them could speak English, and that was so easy to communicate with them. And they had been really starving.
Right.
These folks were almost down and out. Our Air Force had been dropping care packages to them to sustain them. And as my wife pointed out, the Dutch were using their tulip bulbs for food.
Right.
But they would not eat all of the tulip types, so they could save one at least to reproduce them later on when the Germans were gone.
When the Germans left. Anne Marie told us about how the houses would not have baseboards because they would burn those baseboards to heat up the pots to cook the tulip bulbs.
Yes.
And the baseboards were missing because they would use that as kindling to cook with.
To cook with, and then also to keep warm.
Right. Right. You said you didn't meet a lot of resistance, a lot of combat until actually you had gotten to Holland. But talk about that, and then I want you to lead us up to your crossing of the Roer River, and then through the Battle of the Bulge, and in February when you were involved in the attack where you were wounded. So sort of take us, if you will, from that point, getting into Holland and up to the Roer River.
Yeah. Well, I think I mentioned that our division was sort of positioned to go to the north of the American lines.
Right.
And so our division ended up on the left flank of our army, right next to the British, as you mentioned. And pretty soon we were fighting through little towns in Germany,
Right.
and through the Siegfried line, what was left over of the Siegfried line. And eventually we got to the Rohr River, which in normal times was just a little stream, really. But the Germans controlled big dams upstream, and they used them to let water flow, let water out, and inundate the valley, and make it very, very difficult to go across. By the time they got through, they that river was like a mile and a half wide.
Right.
So we had to stop there till they ran out of water, and we had been put in to cross at certain dates, and the dates were backed up until February the 23rd. That's
Right.
when we really crossed.
February of 1945. Talk about what happened that day.
Well, of course, there was great artillery barrages, and I remember our tanks were lined up in numbers, great numbers, on our side of the river, and actually they were also participating in the artillery barrage, and remember going by the tanks, and their guns sticking up over our heads, and it was quite a barrage to quiet down the other side of it. Yeah.
And you were in a building that took an artillery hit.
Yes, that was after we had crossed, and we had moved in about, I'd say a mile, and then of course the Germans were counterattacking, and the city was, the village was pretty well run over by the Germans, and we were in a tight situation, and so we called for our own artillery to hit the same place we were and trying to stop the attacks. And so we tried to take cover at that time, and the folks that I was with, we picked a certain building and ran in there, but then it was hit. So that's lost most of our friends right at there, our buddies, and luckily I was only what they call a $1 million wound, so
Right.
I'll survive that. Yes.
Indeed. I want to mention your brother George was with you in the same company, a different platoon, so he was pretty much with you this whole way. He wasn't with you, obviously, when you were hit, but he knew that you were hit. And matter of fact, he was the one that wrote the letter back to Marie that said that you had been hit, but you were okay.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, I guess the interesting part about that is that my brother and I had come to A&M together,
Right.
and then we had been inducted together and went into the service together and into the European theater together.
Right.
Yes.
Right. That is unique. I want to go to some photographs now that you supplied us. These are photographs from your collection, from your home, and I want you to talk a little bit about them. We're going to go. I think the first picture is one that I found. I believe that's you right there.
Oh,
that's is that when you were at Texas A&M?
No, that's my high school photograph.
Oh, that's your high school photograph. Okay.
That uniform's an ROTC uniform.
Okay.
I was
So that was in El Paso.
in El Paso, Austin High School.
Austin High School in El Paso in the ROTC.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Now this is Texas A&M, and I've put a little arrow up there, a little amateur arrow there to show. Couldn't get the entire company in that one picture because that's about half the company right there. But there you are standing in front of the very familiar building there at Texas A&M.
At that time, they used to call us frogs. The first half of the year,
Right.
we were frogs, not fish, I think.
Not fish.
No.
So that's half a group of the frogs right there. And here we have, this is later on in with your company when you're in the Army. And I've put a couple of arrows there. On the left arrow there, I believe, is you, and that's your brother, the right arrow that I have pointed there.
That's correct, yeah.
Right.
Company K.
Company K. Wow. Talk about this picture.
Oh, I guess that's somewhere after the war's over,
Right.
the occupational duty. So
Fine looking soldier there. Okay.
he's young anyway.
You're young anyway. Now this is on a shipping dock, is that right?
Yes, excuse me. That's coming back after the war, and we had been in occupation for a while, and little by little they were bringing all our folks back, and that's on the boat that I came back. It's a Liberty ship,
I see.
and they were used extensively during World War II.
Right. Now talk about this picture. This is kind of a funny story here. You're an Army man, but you're in that picture, and I think you're the one in the dark Navy uniform. Talk about how this came about.
Well, now that's at Texas University. We were stationed at Camp Swift, which is close by, really.
Right, near Elgin.
And I had some friends that were in the naval service in Texas University. Just like when we went to ASTP in Ohio State, and when these folks were in the Navy program at Texas University. And I had one of those sailors there one of the people there at Texas University in the Navy got to be my brother-in-law, married my sister.
Right.
But we traded them uniforms. We give them our Army duds, and we borrowed their sailor duds and took this picture. That was in 43, 44, somewhere in there. 40, before going over.
Before going over. And you're the one in the dark sailor.
That is correct.
Sailor uniform right there. This is your shadow box, as it were, a picture of it with your awards. Obviously, you see on the top right, that's the Purple Heart that you received for being wounded in 1945. And I see the Bronze Star Medal on the top left. And obviously, these are awards that you're very proud of, as you're proud of your service.
Yeah, yes. Mostly the ones on below are service awards.
Right, right.
The patches, the one on the left is the Ozark Division patch. And as you can see how it almost spells out Ozark.
Correct.
The one in the middle patch is the ASTP program patch, Army Specialized Training Program.
Right.
And then the third one is the Army patch.
Right.
So that's about the...
And then the service medals, the 5 service medals and the ribbons that go with those
yeah, they're on
below.
top. Yeah,
And the ornament there above the middle patch, the blue, the sort of the aqua blue one.
that's the 405th Infantry Division patch.
Okay.
And then right above it is the Combat Infantry badge.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And there's my dog tag right up above the
that.
Army.
Sure. Sure. I see that. I know that you're very proud of that. Like so many who served in the European theater, when you left, after you had healed from your wounds, when you left, it was your thought that you would be getting ready to go to Japan and fight the war there, and what was going to be a ground war in Japan. And of course, as history will tell us, that never happened with the dropping of the bomb. But that was the intent. Obviously, that's what you thought when you came back to the United States. You were getting ready to go west.
Well, before I came to the United States, because by the time I got to the United States, the war in the Pacific was over.
Right.
In August. So I was in occupational duty, but they were rigging to go from Europe direct to the Far East to complement the other people there, other forces there.
Right. And one very important thing you did was to reunite with Marie, and you all were married, and you were married in El Paso, I believe, and then you all packed up and came to Texas A&M. Is that right?
Almost right.
Okay.
We were married in Columbus, Ohio.
Columbus, Ohio, that's right,
Yes.
where she lived.
Where she
Right,
lived. That's
right.
our home territory. Yeah.
Right, married in Columbus, Ohio, and then brought her to Texas A&M. You told me a story right before we got started about your dad, and I just think that that is fascinating. Your dad is of French descent, and your mother is of Mexican descent.
Right.
And he came over at Ellis Island. He was an immigrant from France,
That is
and that's
right.
how he got here. That's I know that's something that you're very, very proud of.
Oh, yes. He came over by himself
Mm-hmm.
at 16 years of age, and he was already a, I don't know, what do you call it, full-fledged
Right.
carpenter, cabinet maker. And he did it on his own. He couldn't speak the English language when he landed, but he learned it and worked his way through, and finally he migrated to El Paso, where he met my mother.
Where he met your mother.
Now, another little story about him is that he volunteered for World War I, and he went back to France in the U.S.Army.
I'll be darned.
So he fought in that war. We fought on this second war, and so
What a wonderful heritage. Jules, I know you're proud of that, and we're proud of you, and thank you for your service, but we are out of time. Thank you for being here.
thank you.
Jules and Marie Jacquin's children know about World War II and their father's service, and we can only hope that the schools will continue to teach the lessons of the sacrifices of that greatest generation. We certainly remember, and we salute Jules Jacquin and all veterans for their service. I'm Tom Turbeville. Please join us next time on Veterans of the Valley.